Hello, and welcome to Searching the Scriptures, a daily podcast where Bible questions will be given Bible answers. No opinion, just Bible. For today's episode, we will be looking at the question of what does the Bible mean when it says, "Call no man father"? Well, where does this topic come from? Well, it comes from the book of Matthew. If you would turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 23, we're going to read verses 8 to 11. And the idea of this story is Jesus is telling his disciples not to be like the hypocritical Pharisees. The Pharisees were a group of people who were religious leaders in Israel at the time of Jesus. These men loved to be honored by other people. They loved to be called rabbi and master. Another word for master would be teacher. And father. They loved to be called those names. It made them feel important. So it is in that context that we find Christ's response starting in verse 8. So Matthew chapter 23 starting at verse 8. "But be not ye called rabbi, for one is your teacher, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant." Christ was teaching that his disciples were not to be like the Pharisees. They weren't to be called rabbi and master and father. There weren't to be religious titles like this. They weren't to do this. Christ said, don't do this, because all of his disciples were going to be equal, and their greatness was not going to come from titles, but from service. You read that throughout the New Testament. Christians are to be in service to other people. We aren't to be trying to get power. We aren't trying to make ourselves great. We aren't to have these religious titles. Jesus condemns such. What we learn from this is that when men and women use religious titles today, such as Father or Reverend or Right Reverend or Pope or any other title, they are disobeying Jesus Christ in this verse. Why? Because Jesus Christ said, don't do that. Such titles do not please God. If we want to please God, we have to obey everything. We don't get to pick and choose what verses we like. So there are verses that are our favorite verses. They may teach something that we like to hear. But we can't just teach our favorite verses. We can't pick, I like the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapter 5 to 7. And I will only hear that. And then we'll leave the rest of the entire New Testament undone. Matthew chapter 23 tells us, call no man father. These are religious titles. But that does lead us to one more question. What are we to do about the person we call dad? May we call him father? The answer is yes. Is that my opinion? No. The Bible tells us this. Turn to the book of Ephesians. In the book of Ephesians, children are taught how they are to treat their parents. In Ephesians chapter 6, we're going to read verses 1 and 2. Ephesians 6, verses 1 and 2. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise." We have an earthly father. He is the person who is called dad. It is not a religious title that he takes. It is a physical title. He is our Father. What Matthew chapter 23 was dealing with was religious titles. It wasn't talking about physical relationships. It was talking about religious titles. The Pharisees were using these religious titles to make themselves above the rest of the people. There is no Christian here on earth that is above any other Christian. We all have different roles that we lead. Some might be the preacher of a congregation. Some might be the elders or the deacons. But we are all Christians. There is not one who is above the other, even though we might have different roles. So then, as a religious title, we may call no man father. However, we may properly call our male parent by the scriptural term of father. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode. Searching the Scriptures has been brought to you by the East End Church of Christ, which meets every Sunday at 10 a.m. at 3601 Victoria Park Avenue, Suite 200, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. If you have any Bible questions that you would like to have answered during this podcast, or if you have any general comments about what you have heard today, you may email them to Toronto East End Church of Christ at gmail.com. That's Toronto East End Church of Christ at gmail.com. Finally, if you'd like to catch up on any episode that you missed, you will find them at www.eastendchurch.org under the Daily Podcast tab found on the main page. I hope you have found the few minutes that we have spent together today useful in expanding your knowledge of what the Bible says. Please join me tomorrow when we will be discussing the topic of, does the Bible speak of people rising from the dead? Goodbye, and have a great day.